Title: Whispers in the Hollow. The storm had been raging for hours, its howls scraping against the windows, as the small cabin sat isolated in the heart of the forest. The only warmth inside came from a flickering fire, casting long shadows on the rough wooden walls. It was the perfect setting for a weekend getaway. At least, that's what Sarah had convinced herself. The quiet solitude, the peaceful escape from her hectic life, was all she had hoped for, or so she thought. Sarah was alone. Her friends had bailed at the last minute, leaving her with the keys to the old cabin, a place tucked away from civilization. The kind of place you wouldn't find unless you knew exactly where to look. It had once been a hunting lodge, but now it sat abandoned, a relic of the past. The locals spoke little of it, mostly avoiding it, and for good reason. The place had a history, a dark one. Sarah poured herself another cup of tea, the steam rising gently as she sat in the armchair by the fire. The wind outside moaned, rattling the windows with every gust. She glanced at her watch. Midnight. The perfect hour for a ghost story, she thought with a nervous laugh. Then, just as the wind howled again, she heard it. A soft sound, almost imperceptible over the storm. A faint thud. It came from somewhere deep in the house, upstairs. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. Sarah stood up slowly, setting her cup down with a nervous clink. Her footsteps were muffled on the thick rug as she approached the staircase. The wooden beams creaked above her head, groaning with the weight of the storm. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs, staring into the pitch-black hallway that led to the second floor. There it was again, thud sound, louder this time. She swallowed hard and took a step forward, her breath caught in her chest. The wooden steps creaked under her weight as she ascended, each footstep echoing in the hollow silence of the house. The sound seemed to follow her, reverberating around her, as if the house itself was alive, watching her every move. At the top of the stairs, she paused, listening. The hallway stretched out before her, long and narrow, with closed doors on either side. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, thick and suffocating. The wind howled louder now, but it wasn't the wind she was afraid of. It was coming from behind one of the doors at the far end of the hall, the one with the cracked wood and rusted handle. She had seen it when she arrived, but hadn't thought much of it. Now, it felt as though that door was calling to her, beckoning her forward. She took a deep breath and slowly made her way toward it. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. It was cold, colder than it should have been, as if the room behind it was frozen in time. Her pulse quickened, and she could hear the faint rustling of something, someone, moving on the other side. The door creaked open, the sound slow and agonizing, as if reluctant to give way to the truth hidden behind it. She peered inside. The room was empty, except for the darkness. No furniture, no signs of life. Just shadows that seemed to writhe and curl at the edges of her vision. And yet, something felt wrong. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rot. There was a dampness to the room, the kind of chill that sank deep into your bones. Sarah's eyes were drawn to the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed darker than the rest. Then, something shifted in the corner. A low, rasping breath. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the storm outside. It was a voice, faint and weak, but unmistakably there. Sarah froze. Her heart hammered in her chest. The door slammed shut behind her, the force of it shaking the very foundation of the cabin. She spun around, but there was no one there. The room was silent again, except for the faint sound of something shifting, something moving. She stepped back, her foot catching on the floorboards. She almost fell, but caught herself just in time. The cold sweat on her skin felt like ice. She knew she shouldn't be here. She knew she should leave, run away, but her legs wouldn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the shadows, as if some force was holding her in place, compelling her to stay. Suddenly, a voice whispered from behind her, so close it felt like breath on her ear. Sarah whipped around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, yet the voice had been so real, so clear. She backed away toward the door, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The floor beneath her feet seemed to shift, and the shadows seemed to grow taller, pressing in around her. It was coming again, the sound of footsteps, but this time they weren't hers. They were closer, much closer, as if someone or something was walking toward her. She turned to run but stumbled, falling to her knees as the floor seemed to tilt beneath her. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of decay. Her head spun as the shadows moved closer, almost reaching out to grab her. Then, everything went still. The footsteps stopped. The voice fell silent. The storm outside seemed to fade away, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet. And then she saw it. In the darkest corner of the room, something began to take shape. A figure, tall and twisted, its features obscured by darkness. It was as though the shadows themselves had formed into something more, something alive. Its eyes glowed faintly, 2 pinpricks of light in the darkness. They stared directly at her, unblinking, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Sarah couldn't move. She couldn't scream. All she could do was watch as the figure slowly began to take a step toward her, its movements slow and deliberate. The floor beneath her groaned as it shifted again, and she realized with horror that the shadows weren't just in the room. They were everywhere. They were alive. She scrambled to her feet, her breath ragged as she reached for the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. The shadows were pressing in from all sides now, crawling up the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The figure in the corner was no longer the only thing there. There were others, more of them, creeping out from every darkened corner of the room. "Leave this place." The voice came again, this time louder, more insistent. But it was too late.